Growing up, I didn't play as many games as I do now. I've had some good experiences, and some not so good experiences. This, of course, leads us to the topic of our video, the Spongebob Squarepants Movie Videogame. I have fond memories of playing this game when I was younger. However, this is a tie-in game, and those have a reputation, to say the least. So the question is whether or not this game is genuinely good, or if I was just tricking myself into thinking it's good. And believe me, I've done the latter. So the Spongebob movie game I remember was released for GameCube, PlayStation 2, and Xbox One. I mean the original Xbox. I grew up with the PlayStation 2 port, but for the sake of this video, I'll be using footage from the GameCube version. There also exists SpongeBob movie games for Game Boy Advance and PC, but they're radically different and I have no experience with them, so we're pretending they don't exist. Time for a disclaimer. I'm going to be going over the plot of the movie and the game, and thus they will be heavily spoiled, if you care about that. Actually, let's get the plot out of the way right now and compare the two. Both the game and the movie start off with SpongeBob experiencing a dream in which he is a heroic manager of the Krusty Krab. The game, however, lengthens things. This is going to be happening a lot. Instead of dropping you off at the Krusty Krab, the game drops you off in a short platforming level leading to the Krusty Krab, showing you some of the ropes of the game. After the dream sequence, the plot continues as Mr. Krabs unveils yet another Starbucks, I mean the Krusty Krab too. Shortly after, it's then revealed that SpongeBob didn't get the manager position he was really hoping for, and sulks off towards the Goofy Goober ice cream parlor. This brings us to our next level. I'm ready, Depression. Well, that's certainly a level name. Here you take control of Patrick for the first time as you chase after SpongeBob through Goofy Goobers while they're drunk off their asses from ice cream, I guess, which didn't happen in the movie. You can't help but wonder if Goofy Goobers is actually as chaotic and nutty as it is behind the scenes, or if it's the ice cream doing really strange things to the minds of SpongeBob and Patrick. It's also here that you meet Mindy for the first time, who hasn't been properly introduced to SpongeBob and Patrick yet. Mindy has no reason to help them yet, but here she is anyway. After the shenanigans that occur at Goofy Goobers, the plot starts to gain a tiny bit of momentum. Plankton executes Plan Z by stealing the crown of King Neptune and blaming it on Mr. Krabs, which leads to King Neptune wishing to execute Mr. Krabs. After some more shenanigans, a deal is made for SpongeBob to trek to Shell City to retrieve the crown in 6 days to prevent the execution of Mr. Krabs, with Mindy being properly introduced to the duo and offering some support. SpongeBob and Patrick then hop in the paddy wagon, a car that now exists, and drive off towards Shell City. The third level begins, and we are introduced to the second major gameplay type, driving. The level design and controls here are somewhat different, being more of an obstacle course, but still overall in line with the vanilla platforming stages. While they're driving through Bikini Bottom, it's shown that the city is already being transformed into Plankton's dystopia, meaning Plan Z is somehow further along in the game than it is in the movie. Not to mention we've seen Plan Z craze before Plan Z was even set in motion. Continuity and plot is not this game's strength. It's more so just here to loosely tie everything together. After SpongeBob and Patrick make their way out of Bikini Bottom, they reach the county line, and the paddy wagon ends up getting stolen by a thug. Here, the game also unveils the true nature of Plan Z sooner than the movie. It's not just revealed sooner, but it's also relevant sooner. In the movie, SpongeBob and Patrick just walked through the desert. Here, SpongeBob platforms his way through the desert, dismantling radio towers that control the bucketheads in the desert. After SpongeBob dismantles a handful of towers, we are introduced to the third and final major gameplay type, sliding. For the life of me, I do not know why this is here. There was no sliding in the movie, it's just here. Anyway, SpongeBob and Patrick slide around a bathtub for some reason and dismantle more radio towers. After that diversion, SpongeBob and Patrick make it to the Thug Tug where they find their stolen car. In the movie, they're in, have a diversion, and sneak the key out. Meanwhile, in the game, Patrick flat out brawls and platforms his way through the Thug Tug, chasing after the key as it flies away in mishap after mishap. After both variations of the Thug Tug Kerfuffle, Spongebob and Patrick have the paddy wagon back. And you know what that means? Time for another driving level. The level design here is mixed up a bit. Instead of driving through a linear obstacle course, you drive laps around the track collecting 5 keys to unlock the gate at the start. The story then moves on, and SpongeBob and Patrick are lured into a siren-like trap via ice cream. And once more, it's time for the game to branch off, as instead of immediately fleeing the monster, Patrick fights in a boss battle. Patrick beats the frogfish boss, and literally nothing changes. After a short chase, SpongeBob and Patrick end up abandoning the car and watch it get eaten. Discouraged, they are ready to go back home. However, Mindy arrives, shows what Plankton has done to Bikini Bottom, and manages to convince them to push onward by giving them seaweed mustaches and making them believe they're men. In the movie, SpongeBob and Patrick decide to just jump off the cliff into the chasm below to continue their journey without a second thought, nearly costing them their lives. However, in the game, they make the arguably less foolish decision of sliding down the trench. Sure, I guess? Honestly, the scope of this level actually feels impressive, because with the way it's rendered, you can see bits of the level ahead long before you ever get to them. Once they get to the bottom, one of two events happen. In the movie, the duo have a very euphoric musical number. Or, more relevant to us, SpongeBob platforms his way through the trench, weaving in and out the insides of giant monsters. Also look, I know this is the deep sea, but I don't want to know how some of this works. The two make it out of the trench, and before re-syncing with the movie, it's time for a platforming stage to the dump with Patrick. You know, that place they were barely in. That's now been turned into an entire level where Patrick smashes TVs that are hypnotizing people, much like the radio towers in the desert. This is twice Plankton and his forces have set up operations in a remote place before SpongeBob and Patrick even reach it. They work fast. Also, there are people out here in Nowhere Land? Furthermore, Patrick doesn't have his seaweed mustache for some reason. Totally important detail to point out. Finally, the duo meet up with Plankton's hired assassin, Dennis. Jeez, buddy, what took you so long? The construction crews are faster than you. This, of course, translates into a boss fight in which Dennis turns SpongeBob into a hammer and flings miniature toilets at Patrick. Okay, sure. And just like the previous boss fight, the outcome is not changed at all. Dennis still gets crushed by a diver, perceived to be a fearsome Cyclops, who then abducts SpongeBob and Patrick. SpongeBob and Patrick pass out, but before they awaken, the game adds a dream sequence where there wasn't one before. And it's a driving level. SpongeBob and Patrick must successfully follow Goofy Goober through a Goofy Goober theme park in order to exit it. For some reason.
You may only leave when I let you.
This is one of the more out of left field changes in the game. Anyway, once that nightmare is over, SpongeBob and Patrick awaken in the Cyclops' lair, a gift shop, which they then learn was their destination all along, Shell City. The duo are then put out to be dried up and turned into souvenirs, singing a sad reprise of the Goofy Goober theme song as they die, which got me to cry when I was younger. The duo are then revived through their own heart-shattering tears. The duo grab the crown and escape the Cyclops by sliding up and out, wrecking his shit along the way. The duo make it onto the beach and are faced with the dilemma of not having a way to get home when all of a sudden David Hasselhoff. Okay, sure. Dennis returns to attempt to finish his job, and guess what? Time for a boss battle on David Hasselhoff's back. It makes sense, but why? Look at it. Dennis tries to kill SpongeBob by throwing a multitude of knives at him, with Hasselhoff not paying much mind to this. Both Dennis boss fights are made trickier due to the fact that thugs start to spawn in the second and third waves, which can be frustrating. After that boss fight, literally nothing changes again, and Dennis gets knocked the fuck out. Now in the movie, David Hasselhoff launches SpongeBob and Patrick straight into the Krusty Krab 2, and the climax takes place. However, the game has one more diversion for us to go through. Hasselhoff ends up launching us right into the middle of Planktopolis. SpongeBob then platforms his way through the decently lengthy Planktopolis, destroying all that stands in his wake. However, once we get through that stage, we're only halfway through Planktopolis. Mindy chimes in and says that the only way to get to the Krusty Krab 2 in time is if they have the paddy wagon. She then offers to revive the paddy wagon for some of the collectibles that... Wait, what? I know I shouldn't expect logic out of this game, but where was this before? She's been handing out these collectibles herself for challenges. Why couldn't we bring back the paddy wagon earlier, Mindy? Why must we jump through your hoops? Oh well. SpongeBob and Patrick get the paddy wagon back and drive through Planktopolis to reach the Krusty Krab 2. Interestingly enough, this level is a warped version of the first driving level played in reverse. Though, why are there cautionary road slip signs, specifically for the paddy wagon? You know what, never mind. Finally, SpongeBob and Patrick have made it to the end, but Plankton executes the last card up his sleeve. He puts a bucket helmet on King Neptune and mind controls him. In the movie, we get a pretty rad musical number. This translates into a pretty rad and clever boss fight for the game. I mean, first off, the level is called Turn the Tables on Plankton. Sure, okay. But to actually beat the boss, you need to turn all the tables in the arena? You cheeky fox. The first phases are easy enough, just dodge the fire or electricity coming out King Neptune's trident for long enough. For the final phase, however, the floor breaks up, some enemies spawn, and the music turns into a portion of the Goofy Goober rock song from the movie's version of the climax, and I just love it all. The final boss may be a bit too generous with the checkpoints, but hey, this is SpongeBob, not Dark Souls. Thus, the journey is concluded. Now that we've discussed the story, let's discuss how the game handles presenting it. This game has two types of cutscenes. The first of these is in-game cutscenes. They handle and animate decently enough, and are even lip-synced pretty well. However, there is a more prominent type of cutscene that the game uses to handle its major story beats. Slideshows. They mostly consist of images from the movie, or generic promotional art, with a voiceover, normally a narrator. Plus, they tend to use transitions like a 5th grade PowerPoint. One of the worst offenders of this is the cutscene after the final boss.
Kill him! Kill him, you idiot! Idiot? No, idiot. French for handsome man. Eugene Krabs, it looks like you were innocent the whole time. Oh well, that's why pencils have erasers. And now to thank the brave heroes who recovered my crown and saved Bikini Bottom, SpongeBob and Patrick, you have performed a manly deed.
I'm so proud of you.
Thanks, Mindy. I've learned a few things about myself. I may be a dork and a wingnut.
And a knucklehead McSpazatron.
Yes, but more importantly, I'm a kid, and I like being a kid. I'm just glad that everything is back to normal.
And so ends the most heroic tale ever told in Bikini Bottom.
Of course, the fact that these cutscenes are so low quality might be an indication that the game was rushed, especially given that it was released a year after the previous console SpongeBob game. So I didn't know until a few years ago that there was another SpongeBob console game that used the same engine as the movie game. The amount of assets the movie game reused surprised me. I used to think the movie game was built from the ground up, so seeing the following was... Even the moves and abilities feature reused assets, though they also highlight what the game does differently. In Battle for Bikini Bottom, you would primarily play as Spongebob. Here and there, you would switch out and play as Patrick or Sandy. In the movie game, however, you play as Spongebob and Patrick pretty evenly. It's a shame Sandy was cut from the sequel entirely. Well, that's not entirely true. Here she is! Different characters had different abilities. Patrick had access to a belly attack, an enemy stunning ground pound, and the ability to pick up and throw objects. Armed with a bubble wand, SpongeBob had access to a spin attack, an upwards thrust, and a ground pound of his own, though it doesn't stun like Patrick's. After beating the first third of the game, SpongeBob gains access to a bowling ball projectile, and after beating the second third, a guided missile attack. There are also situations in which SpongeBob can turn into a ball and roll around, or wall jump between two walls, but these are done when the environment tells you to, not when you want to. The movie game, however, treats its moves differently. Unlocking plays a much bigger and slightly different role. Unlike Battle for Bikini Bottom, where you have most of your moves unlocked and you collect golden spatulas to unlock more levels, the movie game has you start off with one move each for SpongeBob and Patrick, the Karate Spin and the Star Spin respectively, and you have to collect Goofy Goober tokens to unlock more moves. You still need moves to progress through platforming levels, meaning it's slightly the same in the end, but it's different enough to note. The moves you unlock are as follows. Midway through the Goofy Goober stage, Mindy teaches Patrick the cartwheel for a couple tokens. This move is actually fucking useless progression-wise, and just serves as a continuous attack with a slight speed boost. When in the desert, Mindy teaches SpongeBob the bash move, which functions like his upward thrust from Battle for Bikini Bottom. It's used to flip platforms and attack flying enemies and boxes. In the Thug Tug, Mindy teaches Patrick the ass smash. No, seriously, it's called the ass smash. It has a sensor to everything.
It's called the smash.
This is the ground pound maneuver, of course, and this time it's completely exclusive to Patrick. Later on in the trench, Mindy teaches SpongeBob the sponge bowl, acting basically exactly like it did in the last game, being used to hit ground level switches, objects, and enemies from a distance. In the next level, the dump, Patrick gives Mindy Goofy Goober tokens in order to be taught the pick up and throw ability. Once SpongeBob reaches Planktopolis, the guided bubble missile from Battle for Bikini Bottom returns in the form of music, as SpongeBob learns a sonic wave guitar, clearly adapted from the movie's climax. What makes these moves stand out from Battle for Bikini Bottom's moves is the fact that they can be upgraded. Throughout their adventure, SpongeBob and Patrick will be picking up thousands of toxic masculinity points. I mean,
Manliness points.
they really cranked up the gotta be men shit from the movie 2011.
I'm feeling like more of a man already. These just ooze macho.
Macho stuff. How much of a man do I have to be? Beware of the girth.
Nothing like little man type stuff. That's giving up manliness, even in the corners. We're men. Oh, no sweat, Mindy. We're men now.
The manliness has vanished.
Look, buddy, I hate to burst your bubble, but you're talking to two men here. We don't have time for these silly games.
Yeah, we are the manliest of men.
Anyway, these points are not unlike the shiny objects from Battle for Bikini Bottom. However, they aren't used to buy Goofy Goober tokens or open up alternate paths and sections of levels in this game. The many points that the duo pick up are used to upgrade the moves and abilities given to them, as well as their health, and I love it. The upgrades to these moves are as follows. The Karate Spin and the Star Spin. They must be upgraded individually, but once upgraded, SpongeBob and Patrick's spins will have more attack power and slightly boosted range. They also gain the ability to reflect enemy projectiles back at them. They may be subtle upgrades, but they have a lot of utility and are arguably the most useful. The Cartwheel. Patrick's cartwheel gains more attack power and a large area around him that will allow him to smash through objects easier. Bash. SpongeBob's little red boxing glove turns metallic, spiked, and sticks to objects. After a short while, or if done manually by pushing the button again, the planted glove will explode, doing decent damage to the area around the glove. Smash. Patrick goes from using his ass to using his head. It does more damage and will stun nearby enemies like in Battle for Bikini Bottom. This is the one move you're required to upgrade, as the dump requires you to stun and throw enemies. And the Sponge Bowl. The bowling ball, much like the glove, takes on a larger, metallic, and spiky appearance, as well as the ability to explode, either on command or upon hitting something. Throw. Patrick's throw goes much farther, and is noticeably more destructive. The Sonic Wave. The guitar waves last longer, have more attack power, and can home in on objects within range, regardless of how much time is left. While the game does end up pushing certain ways to kill enemies for most parts of the levels, these moves give you some agency on how to take down many of them. The movie game has one other major difference from Battle for Bikini Bottom, and it can be argued whether or not this is good or bad depending on your taste. Battle for Bikini Bottom featured 9 somewhat linear but large open stages, 3 boss battles, and a hub. The movie game features 7 much more linear platforming levels, one of which is a small tutorial, 4 driving levels, 3 sledding levels, and 4 boss battles. Despite technically having less levels, Battle for Bikini Bottom will most likely take longer for you to beat and or complete. However, both games make the level designs work. And if you like the driving and sliding levels, they break up the gameplay pretty nice and add some variety. Like slideshows, however, there is another aspect to the movie game that makes it clear it was rushed. Time and ring challenges. All platforming levels have 5 side objectives, which usually feature bite-sized challenges or mini-challenge levels. The driving and sliding levels, however, have 3 side objectives that must be tackled one by one. Time challenges, which are simple enough, just have to get to the end of the stage by the time limit. Ring challenges, which can be pretty painful. You must make your way through the course, driving through the predetermined rings that appear along the track. The rings disappear if you don't get through in time, and if you fail to make it through a ring, you have to start the whole thing over again. And let me tell you, this will happen a lot. You will need patience. Then there are
Macho
time challenges, in which the time you have to make it to the end is much more strict, requiring a mastery of the course and knowledge of the shortcuts. Admittedly, the ring challenges can help you here, as they may teach you some shortcuts you haven't considered. Maybe. These challenges were most likely put in to help pad the game out without actually doing much to the level design. Fortunately, if you don't want to 100% complete the game, you are not required to do these missions. Speaking of side objectives, let's talk about the other recurring ones. There are bungee challenges in which you give SpongeBob one hell of a wedgie in order to destroy all the targets in the pits below. Sonic Wave guitar challenges, where you guide SpongeBob's Sonic Wave guitar through a series of rings, much like in the driving and sliding levels. However, these can be oddly satisfying and are few and far between. The SpongeBob returns from Battle for Bikini Bottom. This time, however, instead of being sprinkled in the level design, they get mini levels of their own, in which SpongeBob must roll through an entire obstacle course in one go. They can be frustrating, but their inclusion here feels more understandable and not as tacked on compared to Battle for Bikini Bottom. Then there are floating block challenges, in which Patrick must platform his way through a mini-level made of almost nothing but floating blocks of different types. Lastly, there are combat arena challenges. SpongeBob must battle his way through waves of 30, 40, then 50 enemies, with more difficult ones showing up in later stages, typically enemies that appear from a later level. There is one exception to this formula, in the final combat arena in Planktopolis. This game's got jokes. Regardless of what you think of the quality of these challenges, however, there's likely one factor you'll enjoy as you travel throughout the game's various locales: the music. Each track does a good job of setting the mood for a level and being a good experience for your sound holes.
Yeah.
It's hard to pick a favorite track, honestly, which is something I can't really say for Battle for Bikini Bottom, but that might be the nostalgia speaking. However, if I had one complaint, it's the fact that there's one track that gets used for all 4 driving levels, as well as a slight variant for a platforming level. It sounds good, it just gets a bit repetitive. Overall, despite being rushed in some areas and being different from both its predecessor and the movie itself, it's clear it has a soul and tries to be a good game. Sure, the presentation can be rough around the edges at times, but the gameplay is pretty solid. And hey, compared to Super Mario Sunshine, it's less painful to return to. Maybe. And hey, while the presentation can leave something to be desired for in some areas, it does well in other areas. They bothered to give Spongebob, Patrick, some level assets, and enemies different skins and animations depending on the level they're currently in. Speaking of being different than Battle for Bikini Bottom and the movie itself though, SpongeBob and Patrick overall as characters feel different. In the movie, SpongeBob and Patrick feel like a couple of unfortunate dorks that get thrust into a journey bigger than them, with the odds stacked against them, but manage to stumble through anyway, with SpongeBob learning that he doesn't need to be a man. In the game, SpongeBob and Patrick feel like a couple of action heroes. They feel like they can just plow through whatever obstacles come their way, tussling head-to-head with dangerous adversaries, and constantly spouting stuff about how manly they are. This game has one more thing up its sleeve, however. It had the pleasure of being a game during the era of cheat codes. They may not be the best cheat codes ever, but it does have the usual stuff like unlocking stuff early, doubling your point intake, and even exclusive costumes which include Cave Patrick, Cave SpongeBob, Goofy Gooper Patrick, and Rip Pants SpongeBob. It doesn't just have obscure cheats, however. Throughout the levels, you'll pick up treasure chests that unlock extras. Sometimes they're a little too hidden, but they unlock decent goodies like silly modifications, concept art, new costumes, voice lines, those slideshow cutscenes to view at any time. Oh. All in all, if I had to say whether or not this game is worth checking out, I'd have to give it a cautious recommendation to fans of 3D action platformers looking for a feel-good time. The same goes for Battle for Bikini Bottom. It's by no means a perfect game, but it manages to be a pretty fun game that handles itself well in the gameplay department. Welcome to the Endslate. This is the part where I beg you to like and subscribe if you enjoyed, because I would like to make more of these videos, and I wouldn't like the effort to be just thrown into the void. I did spend like 3 months on this video. It would have been done a few weeks sooner, but I got distracted. On a different note, if you started playing the game but are having difficulties with those nasty time and ring challenges, perhaps you should look into some guides I uploaded. Links are in the description. Lastly, time for some thanks. I would like to thank Pink Reiner for making the detailed art of my avatar. Thanks a ton, yo. I would also like to thank Hitfilm Express for simply existing, and this video probably wouldn't exist without it. Lastly, I'd like to thank viewers like you. Thank you.
Dream bubbles. I'm surrounded by dream bubbles. Wonder what that means.
Don't ask questions you aren't prepared to handle the answer to.